The Man with the Yin-Yang Eyes. Season 3. Episode 6. After falling into an unconscious state for a few seconds, Big D gradually perceives everything around him. He opened his eyes and looked at his surroundings. Big D finds himself no longer in the hallway as he chases the mage. The scene before his eyes had completely changed. At this point, Big D doesn't seem to believe his eyes anymore. In front of him now was a typical tropical beach. Blue sea and golden sunshine, and of course, indispensable sexy girls are playing on the sand. Big D thought to himself, heaven is here. After rubbing his eyes a few times, Big D confirmed that he wasn't dreaming. He claimed to be on the beach with countless beautiful girls around. For Big D, a scene like this can only be seen in a dream. Glancing around a few more times, Big D immediately shouted with joy. So after a long wait, he can finally get his dream vacation. Overjoyed, Big D seemed to forget why he was able to come here. But right now, this fat guy can't think of anything. The fiery girls around made Big D's mind go numb. He just caught a glimpse of a very sexy girl walking towards him. Without hesitation, Big D immediately took off his clothes and rushed to the girl. Faced with such a flawless masterpiece of nature, Big D is no longer thinking about keeping his face. He rushed to where the girl was standing. Looking at Big D's face right now, surely every girl in the world would panic, scream loudly, and ran away quickly. But suddenly, Big D stopped. It seemed that the last bit of reason left in his head was starting to work again. Remembering his luck with women, Big D suddenly realized something was wrong. Big D thought to himself, with my attitude right now, no girl would stand still without giving me a slap. Something is wrong here. Looks like this fat guy is starting to wake up. And then everything in front of Big D changed quickly. Everything suddenly went dark. A giant black hand appeared in the air. As soon as it appeared, that hand rushed towards Big D's face at a dizzying speed. Right after that was a hammer-like slap in the face of Big D. Stunned for a few seconds, Big D seemed to have woken up. He began to put his hands to his face, eyes bewildered at the scene around him. He discovered that he was still in the hallway before. Everything he saw was an illusion. But that wasn't the most terrible thing. What he was facing right now startled him. In front of Big D is a boxer with a massive body covering his chest with his hand. There were two more guards around at this time. Their attitudes were not friendly at all. By this time, Big D had dimly realized what he was doing while hallucinating. While Big D was still standing motionless, not knowing what to do, I ran to the place. I apologized to the boxer and the two security guards, and after swearing a few sentences, they also forgave us. I put on Big D's shirt and said, "Since when did you change your taste?" Suddenly rushed to grovel him. As if still regretting, Big D said, "Life is really unfair. Good things can only come in dreams, and dreams end too quickly." While putting on his shirt, Big D pointed in the direction the mage had just left. Big D said, "This mage is not easily bullied. In such a short time, he can hypnotize me, put me into hallucinations. You have to be careful when facing him." At this point, I started asking Big D what the mage looked like. "Do you remember what he looked like? Has there ever been a mage like him in Chinatown before?" While unbuttoning his shirt, Big D said, "He's going so fast that I can only see his back. When he turned around, I was hallucinating, so I couldn't remember his face, just remember he wore a ponytail. He's never been here before." After a moment of silence, Big D continued, "Ignore him, I'll go change the reward." Hearing this, I suddenly remembered that Big D brought me out to make a bet. I was so busy chasing after the mage that I forgot about this. I angrily said to Big D, You're a fucking fat guy. You can bet on me too. I don't know if one day you will sell me when I get the price." Hearing me say that, Big D immediately replied, "Come on kid, don't be so harsh. I really want to make money, but you can rest assured, I'm not someone who sells you out for money." Approaching the redemption, Big D continued, "You see, you're going to have to fight Anthony sooner or later. I'm just taking this opportunity to earn a little more money for our trip. I have always believed in you and your ability." While giving the betting ticket to the Big D Redeemer, he said, "This magician reminds me of an evil sect that once existed. My master used to talk about it, but according to my master, it has been lost for a long time because no one can afford to inherit it. If that's the case, then this mage's background is extremely unpredictable." Looking at the stack of money in Big D's hand, I asked, "Did you win that much?" "I think that includes my money too. After all, I'm the one who brought you this money." Hearing me say that, Big D laughed and said, "Come on kid, that's what you should do. You're still young, don't give too much attention to money. Damn fat guy, so he definitely won't give me a dime." After walking for a while, as if remembering something, Big D turned to me and asked, "Hey, where are Tony and his son? I haven't seen them in a while." I told Big D that, after the match, Anthony was unconscious, so Tony took him to the hospital. Fortunately, I could neutralize his magic in time. Otherwise, I don't know what will happen to Anthony. After listening to me describe the situation, Big D nodded and said, "Okay, everything here is considered settled." We immediately return home and prepare to go to Indonesia. I don't want to postpone this trip any longer. Hearing what Big D just said, I was somewhat surprised, so I asked him again, "What do you mean by that? This isn't resolved yet, we can't just leave without clearing things up." Hearing what I just said, Big D scowled. He said to me, "Listen to me, everything here is done. Our main aim is to find a son for Tony, now everything is done, what more do you want? Don't tie yourself up like that, it's better to focus on your own business." From the words Big D just said, it seems that he is already very anxious to go to Indonesia and does not want to care about other things. I completely disagree with Big D on this. I speak up to him, "Big D, we can't be so irresponsible. If we don't get this right, many more people will be harmed. If you don't agree, you can go to Indonesia first. I'll go there to find you when I'm done here." Hearing the last sentence, Big D suddenly stopped. He did not say anything. Suddenly Big D turned around and shouted at me, "You are such a stubborn kid. Leave this to the police to take care of. We're not superheroes that deal with things like that all the time." No matter what Big D has, I still stand by my decision. I said, "Then it's up to you. I won't say anything more. You go home, I will take a taxi to go to the hospital. See you again in Indonesia." After taking a few steps, I said, "But maybe, after this is resolved, I won't be able to go to Indonesia to see you again, so prepare yourself first." After saying that, I walked away, leaving Big D standing still like a statue. A few seconds later, Big D quickly ran after me. While running he said, "Okay, I surrender. I will return the ticket and stay with you. You really are the most stubborn guy I've ever met." Then Big D drove me to the hospital. On the way, Big D and I continued to exchange. We both agreed that there were a lot of confusing things about Anthony being controlled. This was not like what a normal heretic magician would do. Behind that, there must be a larger force manipulating. I continued to ask Big D, "According to you, besides the members of the cult, is there anyone else who can put the soul of an animal into a human body? Plus, I don't know if this has anything to do with the military." Big D answered me, "Your questions are really difficult to answer. The cult is no longer there, so it is impossible to verify whether they have a successor or not. As for the military, it's unlikely that they were not involved. Suddenly Big D laughed and said, "Come on, cheer up kid, aren't we extremely powerful magicians? Is there anyone who can give us a hard time?" Hearing what Big D said, I just kept silent. In this city, there have appeared many powerful evil magicians. So with such a large country, how many people would be hiding in the dark? Looks like Big D is too optimistic. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Big D turned to me and said, "In my opinion, the purpose of the one who controls Anthony in the arena is to test his fighting ability. What do you think?" Still looking at the street, I replied to Big D, "I think so too. Maybe he is checking to see if the results of the test are as desired, and the ring is the most suitable place." Big D exclaimed as if he had just thought of something, "God, do you understand the meaning of this? Surely they're trying to create something like a super soldier. Those who only know how to fight and kill and obey." This thinking of Big D is not wrong. Not only the army, anyone with money wants such soldiers for their evil purposes. Seeing that I seemed to agree with my thoughts, Big D continued, "If my speculation is correct, this will involve many great powers. Do you still want to pursue this?" I immediately replied to Big D, "Stop it? Never. If I can stop this with my own strength, I will definitely do it to the end." Soon we reached the hospital where Anthony was being treated. Before coming here, I called Valentine to come to collect information. When we got to the ward where Anthony was being treated, we met Valentine. She is asking Anthony about his strange expressions. But in response to Valentine's questions, Anthony said he couldn't reveal anything. Anthony said that he is still in the military training program, so all information is kept confidential. Hearing this, Big D suddenly got angry. He rushed out and started shouting at Anthony, "This stupid kid. Do you know that because of that top secret, you almost lost your life? Look to your side. If you die, who will care for your father when he is old and weak? Don't be blind anymore. Tell us everything." I was afraid Big D's anger would make things worse, so I immediately pulled him aside. Then I turned to Anthony and said, "Please think carefully. Put it in your father's case, and you will understand that he was very worried when you went missing. His case was very fortunate to be discovered early. But many others are in danger. Their families are certainly worried as well." At this time, Anthony's father also spoke. "Gregory is right, son. Without him and Master King, I might not have seen you again. Tell us what you know. I believe the police will protect us." Hearing what his father just said, Anthony pondered as if he had just decided on something. After a moment of silence, Anthony began to speak. "I will, but I hope my identity will be kept private. I don't want my father in trouble." Valentine immediately responded to Anthony's request. Then he started telling everything. This must have started 3 years ago. I was then selected to participate in a special training program, like some kind of program to create super soldiers. According to Anthony, after being selected and passing rigorous tests, he was transferred to a secret military base. There were specialized vehicles to take him away during the entire journey, so Anthony did not know where the base was located. He doesn't know where he was being taken, but as a soldier, he swore to always be loyal to his country and carry out all the orders of his superiors, so he didn't mind too much about where he was going. As soon as they arrived at the research area, a loud noise from the glass next to the corridor caught Anthony's attention. Anthony looked in the direction where the sound had come from. He couldn't help but be surprised at what he was seeing. In front of him was a werewolf with hair all over his body. Seeing this scene could not help but make Anthony think of the image of werewolves in the movies he had seen. Now the werewolf seemed agitated when he saw the man. He kept screaming and banging on the glass. Anthony stepped forward to get a better look. He discovers that this person has not completely turned into a werewolf. There is still a part of the human left. The doctor who accompanied Anthony immediately said to Anthony, "It was the prototype of the experiment, but it seems that he did not achieve the desired strength. I hope that your body will be compatible with this method and give better results." After that, the doctor led Anthony to another room, where there was a strange-looking machine. The doctor introduced to Anthony that this was the machine used for the experiment. It will help him increase muscle growth and other body senses, thereby turning him into a perfect warrior with outstanding strength. Although the things in front of her made Anthony a little nervous, from the very beginning, before being recruited, he was warned about unusual things to encounter during the testing process, so he didn't ask any more questions. After entering the machine, the staff around him began to attach a lot of equipment to him. Finally, they inject him with a special drug before starting the machine. Not long after the machine was up and running, Anthony began to feel excruciating pain. The first was his head, which felt like it was about to burst. Then all over my body, a horrible pain tore through my body. He thought his body was about to be ripped apart. Everything was beyond the limits of human endurance. Anthony collapsed and lost consciousness. But the testing process has now reached an important stage that cannot be stopped. So, despite Anthony's condition, the doctor continued to allow the experiment to continue. Not long after, the testing process was coming to an end. Now Anthony was awake. The pain did not go away but was more intense than before. Accompanying the pain was Anthony's pitiful scream. Finally, the experiment ended. The doctor looked at Anthony, put his hand on his head and sighed. The results of this experiment were not what he expected. According to him, Anthony's body did not respond well to the drug he injected him. It seems that the body is resisting that change. He then orders Anthony to be taken away. He is brought to a cell-like room, where there are other selected experimenters like Anthony. After that failed experiment, the doctor conducted a few more tests on Anthony. After each time, Anthony's body began to deform. Sometime later, they announced that Anthony had passed the first phase of the test and would be entering the next phase. Then Anthony was taken to a closed room, in which there was also a wolf, and it was chained. Looking over to the glass on the wall, Anthony realized that someone was watching everything in the room. "Look at the ferocious wolf in front of me." Anthony guessed that they wanted him to fight this wolf to test his strength. This is no big deal for Anthony. Like a well-trained soldier, he has more than enough strength to take down this wolf. What happened next was beyond Anthony's prediction. After a small whistle sounded, Anthony guessed that the chain would be released, and the wolf would rush towards him. But to Anthony's surprise, the wolf suddenly shrank and began to groan in pain. After the wolf stopped struggling, Anthony felt as if something invisible had just come out of the wolf's body. Although he could not see anything, Anthony's keen intuition told him something was rushing towards him. At this moment, Anthony felt as if something had just entered his body, an extremely indescribable feeling that he had never experienced before. Seconds later, Anthony began to feel that he was no longer in control of his body. Everything in front of him gradually became blurred. After that, what Anthony remembered was very vague. He almost didn't remember where he was taken. He only vaguely remembers participating in some ring fights, but he doesn't remember much about them either. Everything with Anthony was like a dream. Anthony says it's not clear how long he's been in this state. It was not until he was taken to the hospital that he could perceive everything around him. Hearing what I just said, I asked Anthony, So during that process of being controlled, you can't remember the face of your controller. To answer me, Anthony just shook his head without saying a word. After hearing Anthony's story, Valentine suddenly waved her hand and turned away. She said, "Okay, I'm going back to the police station. This is related to the military. It is beyond the scope of police control. Sorry, but I can't help this time." Seeing Valentine leaving, Big D rushed to stop him and said, "You can't just leave like that. You are the representative of justice and the law. How can you leave him like that?" Valentine sighed and said, "You don't understand this. The law also has its own rules. This is related to the military side. It's basically impossible for us police to intervene." Hearing what Valentine just said, Big D became angry. "How can you say that? Your responsibility is to protect the people. Anthony will be in danger if you do not deal with it. Plus, if this case isn't resolved, that idiot won't go to Indonesia with me. You have to take care of this, or I won't let you go." Seeing Big D getting angry, I slowly approached him and told him to calm down and slowly find a solution. At this moment, the door of the hospital room opened. The three of us immediately turned our attention in that direction. The two who entered were both wearing black robes with hoods covering their heads. From their appearance, we knew that their purpose of coming here was not good. As soon as they entered the room, both of them took off their hoods. At this time, two extremely scary faces appeared. The man looked like a giant Godzilla, while the woman accompanying him had the form of a leopard. The two immediately roared and charged at us.